Let us get started. Today we will discuss about locomotion and movement, and in this topic we will try to discuss about the locomotory aspect of a human individual, and also how it is different from a movement, and what are the aspects which we need to understand in order to cover this topic like locomotion and movement. So, as such, every living individual, every living organism requires a kind of movement, and this movement is sometimes consists of a partial displacement of an individual or organism, or a complete transfer of the whole body from one location to other location. Now, if we see movement as such, now this movement is a very specific terminology which is used for any kind of movement. Now, we are moving our hand also, that is also a movement. We are moving our jaws, that is also a movement. We have our blinking of eyes, that is also a movement. So, eyelid movement is also, we call it a movement. Now, we have another kind of aspect in the movement, that our tongue is also having some movement. So, the movement stands for anything that is having some sort of motion attached to it. So, that is a specific aspect of movement. Now, if that movement is responsible for changing the location, then we call it locomotion. So, any movement that is responsible for changing the location of of the individual, then we call it locomotion. Now, if we start looking into that, what is the actual aspect locomotion in human body? So, what we are doing, we have feet, we have our leg. So, if we are standing, there is no locomotion, but we are doing some movement with the hand. But once we will start walking, we have changed the position from one location to another location, then we called it locomotion. So, can we rephrase a sentence as shown in the slide, that all locomotion are movements, but all movements are not locomotion. That means, each and every locomotion is involving some sort of movements, but all movements, as I said, the hand is not showing any kind of a displacement. So, we cannot call that one as a locomotion. That movement of the tongue, jaws, or any kind of other movements which are taking place inside the body, we do not call it as a locomotion. So, there is a clear-cut differentiation between locomotion and movement. Now, having said that, we try to understand what are the specific kind of movement or locomotory features available in lower invertebrates, as well as some of the other organism. Now, if we start looking as what we discussed in the last time in our respiratory system lecture also, that we have a coelenterata, and one coelenterate example is hydra. Now, if we start looking into what is happening in hydra, if we draw, suppose this is a hydra which is having a mouth, and then we have something called tentacles. So, we called it tentacles, and these tentacles are on the top, and then we have this basal disc. Now, this basal disc or the bottom is in the substratum. So, this is kind of land, we call it land or the attachment substratum. Now, this hydra is a cylindrical body, it is an irregular shape. Now, there are various kind of possibilities that this particular organism can start locomoting itself. Now, what is happening, Now, this tentacle is as such an organ which is responsible for doing movement. Now, these tentacles, if we start looking what is happening, so there is a possibility that this will roll down in the bottom. So, what will happen? This hydra will kind of attain this shape, and then this basal disc will little bit drag towards the tentacle, and then this tentacle dragging will cause this one movement of the basal disc from this to this location. So, basically what will happen? The location will be like this. So, then what is happening? There is a complete kind of a twisting of the stuff, and then suddenly they will have an erect location. Now, what is happening? This kind of a phenomena where the tentacle is coming and doing some sort of a movement, involved in the movement, is called looping. Now, looping is one such phenomena in hydra where the tentacles are involved in moving the whole body by doing some sort of a movement. Now, since there is a change, then that's why we are calling it locomotion. Now, this is one aspect, looping. Second, there is a possibility that this hydra will start kind of movement where this whole body will twist, and then this will erect in this one, and then again this will fall down. So, the movement will be like this. So, what is happening? This is kind of a twisting, and then again erecting, then again twisting. So, this is not looping, right? This phenomena is called somersaulting. Somersaulting. Now, this somersaulting is another phenomena where the hydra is moving in substratum with the help of tentacles. Now, this tentacles is very important in movement of this hydra. So, what we are trying to emphasize that there are various kind of activities which an organism can do, and because of these activities in the substratum, the hydra is moving its body from one location to another location. These are the typical example of invertebrates we are talking about. Now, this is some. Now, as we said that the hydra is still attaching to the substratum. Now, what is happening? This basal level is moving in different forms. Now, there is a possibility that the hydra can climb with the help of this tentacle, right. So, we need to understand that this particular tentacles can help in climbing also. So, they can hold something, and they can just move with the help of tentacles. So, they can climb also. There is a possibility they can swim also, right, because these are the tentacles. Now, these tentacles can be used in just movement through the water force, and can be nicely attributed to a swimming aspect also. Now, they can also glide. Now, what is happening in gliding? This particular basal level of the body is kind of creating some sort of movement. Now, this movement is involving some sort of action, some sort of force that can help hydra to glide. So, hydra can glide to some certain extent. Now, these are some of the phenomena. Now, there are possibility that the hydra can simply float on the surface of water. Now, what is happening here? We will just try to tilt this hydra with a water surface. Now, suppose this is a water surface, and we have hydra here upside down. Now, what is happening here? The basal body, this can be happening in other way also. So, the basal level or the basal cell, some of the basal cells are involved in producing some sort of gaseous molecule. Now, gaseous kind of content. Now, that gas is a form of an air bubble. Now, that air bubble will come in this area, and this air bubble will hold the body of hydra in such a nice fashion, and because of the water current, this whole bubble will move, and this movement will cause the hydra to move in forward or backward direction depending on the water flow. So, these are some of the aspects where hydra can do some sort of movement. Now, there is another very specific kind of movement which hydra does is, suppose this is substratum and then we have this tentacles attaching to the substratum. Now, simply this tentacle will act as a feet, and they can simply walk on the substratum because of the movement of these tentacles. Now, this movement of tentacles can be in the forward or in the reverse direction, but this tentacle will be involving some sort of movement of the body. Now, this kind of movement is sometimes called as cuttlefish like movement. Cuttlefish like movement. So, basically this tentacle is just crawling down. So, after some time this tentacle will grow like this, and then slowly it will move in the forward or reverse direction. So, there are various kind of movement. So, we are trying to discuss some of the invertebrates movement, and one such example is Hydra in Ciliated. Of course, we will discuss the human aspect of the movement in great detail. Now, having said this invertebrates, there is another very good example, and that is called paramecium. We are not going to discuss much about this invertebrates. I am just giving you an example that this paramecium is roughly having a leaf shaped body. So, kind of shape which looks like leaf. Now, they have small kind of hair like structure throughout the body. Now, this hair like structure is called cilia. Now, this cilia is a very specific structure which are located throughout the body of this organism. These are protozoa. Now, this protozoa is having cilia, and the cilia is responsible for causing movement in this kind of organism. So, the cilia are small. The larger version we call it flagella, which we will discuss in later part. So, this cilia is another important constituent of the movement aspect. There it was tentacle, and in this case it is cilia. So, basically there are some modulation. If we will start looking and seeing the structure aspect of internally why the cilia is different and why the flagella is different, the architect, the structure, the basic functionality of these two organs are quite different. So, there is an evolution always because each and every organism is evolved in order to make a constant progress towards the development of all, either it is respiratory system, digestive system, excretory system, and similarly in locomotory organ also. So, these are some of the structures available in lower invertebrates in order to do movement. Now, we will move on to the next slide, where we can see that what are the types of movement, and if you grossly divide the types of movement, we can nicely say that there are three types of movement. One is called Amoeboid movement, that basically amoeba, it's coming from amoeba, which amoeba does. There is another one called ciliary movement, and then we have muscular movement. So, we will go and discuss these three movements individually in detail. Now, since we have amoeboid movement, so we need to understand why these amoeboid movement are called amoeboid, because amoeba is moving with the help of protoplasm. So, suppose we will try to go back a little bit and try to understand. So, suppose this is an irregular structure of a typical organism called amoeba. Now, these are the area which is called, these are false leg. So, sometimes it is called pseudo means false, podia means leg. So, pseudopodia, anything which relates to pseudo we call it false. So, pseudopodia, false legs. Now, what is happening here? So, this is 1, 2, 3, 4, there are many false legs are there, and what is happening? Suppose this particular organism wants to move in this direction, this pseudopodia is moving and crawling in that direction. So, all protoplasm, so the material inside we call it protoplasm. So, this plasmatic zone which is there will force all the content towards this pseudopodia, and because of this force everything is tilting down, and this tilting movement will basically cause the whole organism to move in forward direction. So, this pseudopodia is very important. Now, the whole phenomena is very important in order to understand some of the basic structure which is available in our body also. Now, if we start looking and trying to understand what are the content which is there in our body. Now, we will try to understand in a different fashion. So, we have blood. If we start defining what is blood, so one can nicely say that blood is a fluid connective tissue. Tissue, anything says tissue is collection of cells. So, blood is a fluid connective tissue, and these are comprising of many different kind of cells, and some of the cells we call it leukocyte. Leukocyte. Some are called erythrocyte. So, erythro means red blood cell, leuko means white, cyte means cell. Leukocyte. So, we have leukocyte which is white blood cell, and we have erythrocyte which is red blood cell. Now, we discussed the red blood cell in respiratory chapter, that these are kind of disc like structure, biconcave in nature, having some diameter and all, and involved in carrying oxygen. Here this leukocyte is very important cell in human body which is responsible for causing defense kind of mechanism. So, whatever defense we have in our body in order to fight bacteria, fight viruses, fight parasite, fungi, these all leukocytes are very important cell in the human body that are responsible for causing any kind of protection, immunity, we call it immunity. In biology we call it immunity. Now, this leukocyte are very much related to a kind of movement what amoeba does. So, they have kind of a spherical structure, and their movement is basically done by those amoeboid kind of movement. So, this whole body acts as pseudopodia, the false leg, and then whole protoplasm can help this whole cell to roll in the surface, right. These are inside blood vessels. So, suppose this is blood vessel, and then the whole cell can nicely move with the help of amoeboid movement with making a protrusion which is called pseudopodia. Now, this is one example that leukocyte which is available in blood can also move with the help of pseudopodia like a structure, amoeboid like movement. And then this is one such a structure in the blood. If we go back to the slide again, and we will see that we have three kind of movement which we discussed. One is amoeboid, ciliary and muscular. So, we are talking about amoeboid movement. Now, the first one which discussed is leukocyte. The second one, sometime in our blood, basically there are many different kind of cell. One such cell is having a nice elongated structure. So, they have very nice elongated structure on their surface. Now, this is important. These cells are specialized in the body to capture the parasite, bacteria and other kind of microorganism entering inside the body. Anything which is less small inside, we call it micro. Microorganism is very small microorganism that can be visible only by microscope, not by naked eye. So, these cells which are available in human body is having very large tentacle like structure on their surface. These are not tentacle, but these are protrusion. Now, this small the kind of structure is giving large surface area. Now, this large surface area is basically or essential to capture the microorganism coming inside the body. Now, this microorganism, suppose there is an organism that is coming from outside. Now, these cells are coming in the site, and capturing this microorganism and just taking it inside. So, they are engulfing, they are just taking it, they are digesting it. So, sometimes these cells are of various type, but in general they are called macrophage. Sorry. So, these are all macrophages. So, macro means large and phage means the eater, phage or phage. So, macrophages are the cell which can eat the microorganism coming from outside. So, macrophages are such cell which is having a large surface area. Now, one can nicely see and correlate this whole structure with amoeba. So, the movement is exactly same, they can nicely move with the help of this tentacle. So, tentacle like structure which we call pseudopodia. So, basically protoplasm of the whole cell is moving in this direction and then these are tilting. So, the movement is basically in the forward direction with the help of this elongated structures. So, macrophages are a cell which are involved in phagocytizing, that the terminology is called phagocytosis, which is phago means eating and then cytosis means involvement of cell. So, macrophages are such cell. So, this is about, of course, we will go in detail about all these aspects in our coming lectures. So, we have discussed two cells in blood which are responsible for causing movement. One is leukocyte and the second is the cell which are having elongated structure, can very specialize in eating. So, they are called macrophages, the larger cell that can eat the microorganism. The second one is ciliary movement. Now, this ciliary movement is related to something which we have discussed in the past classes also. So, if we start and recalling back what we have discussed in respiratory system, that we have a structure called trachea, which is a cartilaginous ring like structure, and this is giving basically the passage of air. Now, this trachea is lined by this ciliated epithelium. So, this is ciliated epithelium. Epithelium is lining. So, this ciliated epithelium is basically lining the trachea and this is causing kind of movement. So, remember one more aspect here, we are calling it movement. So, there is movement, there is no locomotion because the things are constant here. So, this is a constant beating. So, the movement of cilia can trap the dust particle which is coming from the respiratory passage through the nostril. So, we are taking all those gaseous element, and in addition to gaseous element we are also taking some dust particles. So, the lung which is in the bottom of this trachea do not require those dust particles. So, somebody needs to trap those dust and other unwanted material. So, this cilia like structure are basically helping. So, they are in constant movement, and because of this movement they are capturing the dust particle. So, this is one ciliated movement. Similar kind of a structure is also available in our gut, in our digestive system, our stomach, our small intestine. We have a very specific kind of small cell like ciliated, again the same name, ciliated epithelium. So, the lining is called epithelium. The lining of the intestine, the small intestine is having cilia which is helping in the movement of the food particle from small intestine to large intestine. So, we have stomach, so we have esophagus in the top, then we have a stomach, then we have small intestine and then we have large intestine. So, from small intestine to large intestine we need to flow the nutrient, the content, the food particles and all. So, these are done with a very specific structure called ciliated epithelium. There is another organ which we will discuss in coming lectures, and that is the reproductive system. And in reproductive system, the female reproductive system is producing ova from ovary. And if we start looking, again we will discuss in detail. I just wanted to highlight here what is the role of ciliated epithelium. So, ciliated epithelium is something which is forcing the material to the forward direction. Here it is dust particle, it is kind of a trapper here, Now, there it is kind of a movement producer to the food particle. The same thing, ova is produced in a very specialized structure called ovary in the female reproductive system. This ova needs to go inside a very defined area called fallopian tube. And now, this movement of ova from ovary to fallopian tube requires a movement, and that movement is done with the help of ciliated epithelium. So, their lining of reproductive system is also very specifically lined by ciliated epithelium that can move the ova from one direction to another direction, from ovary to fallopian tube, where the fertilization takes place. So, these are some of the very specific ciliated epithelium. Of course, there are many other ciliated aspect is there. Also in our nostril, we have small hair-like structure. See, the epithelium is all ciliated. So, these are hair follicles actually. So, they can trap, but then we have a very small structure, ciliated epithelium, that can cause the movement or the trapping of the dust particle and other kind of stuff in the human body. Next one, which is another very important in understanding the movement of the human system, is muscular system. Now, this muscular system is very important, and this muscular system is basically the actual movement that is happening in our body. So, we have our movement in the hand. This is also a muscular movement. So, we have lot of muscle involved in those movements. So, the movement of hand, say for example, so we are discussing about muscular movement. So, the movement of the muscles, the actual muscle, we will discuss again in next topic about the actual muscle composition and how this muscle is doing all the work. But try to understand here that what is happening is all the muscle system involved in the body are basically doing some sort of movement. So, if I want to contract my hand, I will basically squeeze the muscle, and similarly we have the jaw muscle. So, if we want to talk, we can start moving our jaw muscle. Similarly, the ciliated, the eyelid, and of course, there are many such movement which are involving the actual muscle to take part in the actual process. Having said that, amoeboid movement, muscular movement, and the very specifically ciliated epithelium movement, apart from the amoeboid movement, which is basically happening in the leukocyte level, other movement like muscular movement and ciliated movement are basically controlled by the nervous system. So, we need to understand how this muscle movement is controlled with the help of nervous system. So, basically neurons, the neural network, basically neurons. So, these are very specialized cell in the central nervous system that can govern the actual coordination of this muscular movement. So, these are under my will. So, if I want to fold my hand, I can fold. If I do not want to, I will not. So, this kind of movement is controlled by my will, but there are certain movement which is not under my control, like heartbeat. So, our heart is continuously beating, and those beating also the muscle in the heart, of course, we will go and discuss about this aspect. So, the heart muscle is called cardiac. Anything related to heart, we call it cardiac. So, then cardiac muscle is such muscles in the muscle in the heart which are not in our control. So, basically we have the heart beating continuously going on. So, there is no as such control. So, there is controlled movement and there is uncontrolled movement. So, we will discuss this topic slowly and gradually in order to understand the movement and the locomotion in total. And in next we will discuss about muscle. And in muscle probably we will try to understand and what this muscle is made up of and what the actual composition and how this composition is causing some sort of variation in different type of muscle tissues. And also we will look into the functional aspect of each and every muscle. So, let us try to see the muscle. Now, before going to discuss about this muscle, let me give you some idea about the basic structure of the whole body. Now, if we consider the human body like a cylinder, so if we consider this is like a hollow cylinder, and this cylinder is having an outer covering, and of course we have an outer, and then we can always say that we have a middle, and then we have something called inner. So if we consider, if we divide the whole body cavity in the form of a cylinder, the outer covering is called ectoderm. The middle one is called mesoderm or mesoderm, and the inner lining is called endoderm. So based on the location of this tube or this cavity, we can always define the whole body. We are considering the whole body like a cylinder. So this is a mouth opening and this is anus. So this whole body is now divided into ecto, outer, middle meso, and inner endoderm. If we start looking that what are the actual function of each and every layer in human body, and if we try to understand the evolutionary aspect, this ectoderm is basically the skin layer, the outer surface, outer covering of a human body, and also some of the appendages, while this mesoderm is the actual layer that is going to form the muscle. So we will discuss this area, this middle, which is going to form the whole muscle. And of course there is another part called endoderm or endodermis also, endoderm. This endoderm is basically gut, the gastrointestinal cavity of human being. Now if we consider the whole muscle, the muscle is actually comprising the middle part, the mesoderm, and we will try to discuss what are the different kinds of muscles are there and what are the actual function of this muscular tissue. Now if we see this muscle, there are various functions of this muscular tissue, properties of muscular tissue. So if you just try to see that what are the properties of muscle, then one can nicely see that they have excitability, contractibility or contractility, extensibility, and lastly elasticity. So these are the four distinct kind of properties of muscle cells. So each and every muscle should have excitability. Now excitability stands for the excitation potential. We will not go in detail about all this aspect because this is for higher study, but just for the sake of knowledge, we should have to understand these four properties of muscle are essential in order to give a functionality to muscles. Now we will see that how this muscle and this kind of four properties which we discussed, like extensibility, and then you have excitation potential, then contractibility, and then elasticity kind of activities. These are all mixed together and each muscle should possess this kind of property. Having said that, this all muscle, the muscular part of the human body is basically divided into three parts as shown in the slide. So we have three distinct muscle cell type of muscle actually. So let's start the first one, the skeletal. Skeletal muscle. Now this skeletal muscle is basically the muscle which are attached to the bones. Now this bony structure of each and every bone of the body is basically winded up nicely with this muscle, and that's why these are called skeletal muscle, because these are attached to the skeleton, the actual bony structure, bony framework of the human body. Now this muscle, the various very unique property about this muscle, say for example if we consider our hand. So if I want to fold my hand by my own will, we can fold it. So these are all voluntary in nature. So one can nicely say that these are voluntary muscle. So voluntary means it's under your control. So these are voluntary in nature. And the other very unique aspect about this muscle, if we start looking, if we take out the muscle cell, if we start looking into how this muscle cell are looking, so if suppose this is muscle, they have a strip in between. So they are giving a kind of appearance which is called striated. Striated. So striated is a very specific terminology used for any of those muscles which are having a strip kind of appearance. We will see why this strip look like in between the muscle cell and why these are called striated. So these are voluntary and striated in nature. The second one, which is different than skeletal muscle, is called visceral. Now visceral stands for stomach. Anything related to gut, we called it visceral. So visceral is anything which is related to gut. Gut means gastrointestinal cavity. These muscles are not having this kind of a strip in between. So they are smooth in nature. So they are smooth. They don't have any kind of demarcation. And the second very important property, since these are visceral and they are inside the gut, they are not under our control. So if they are not under our control, they are simply involuntary in nature. That means they are not under our control. And the third one is basically, so we discuss about the gut, we discuss about the skeleton, which is a part of the entire body cavity, where we have the bones actual. And then the third one is very specialized, and as shown in the slide here, is called cardiac. Cardiac. Now this cardiac stands for anything which is related to heart. So cardiac is heart muscle. Now this heart muscle are very specific, that they have a property of, some property of a skeleton and some property of visceral. Now what is here? The muscle of the heart are striated. So striated stands for these are having some sort of distinct marcation in between. But heart is not under our control. So we can't say that stop beating heart or some aspect where you can stop the heart beating. This is absolutely impossible. This is not under your will. So basically these heart muscles are involuntary in nature. So heart muscle is involuntary as shown in the slide, that the skeleton is striated and voluntary in nature. Visceral is non-striated and involuntary in nature, while cardiac is striated and involuntary in nature. So these are the three typical type of muscle cell which we are going to discuss in further classes. But let's try to see the structure of a typical muscle cell. So what is there? Suppose if we start looking into a muscle, that how this muscle looks like, and if we take the cut and suppose this is a bone, the muscle which is there in our forearm. So suppose this is our forearm, or just simply say this is our arm muscle, and we have taken out this muscle and we have taken a cross section. Cross section means anything which you cut horizontally or vertically. So if you take the cross section and if you start looking into what is there in the muscle, so suppose this is the whole area where you dissected the whole area. So these are the small bundles we simply called muscle bundles. Muscle bundles. Now these muscle bundles are basically containing small, very small fibers into it. Now one can simply say these are muscle fiber or fibers. So these are all muscle fibers which are basically in the form of a bundle. Now this muscle fiber, if we start, sometimes this muscle bundle are also called as funiculus. So fascicles actually. So these fascicles are basically the other nomenclature people are using in interchanging the muscle bundle, but we will simply try to not go in detail about the nomenclature and kind of complex word, but simply we will try to stick to muscle bundles. And then these are the muscle fibers which are lying inside the muscle bundle. And if you start looking into this single muscle fiber, if you take out this muscle fiber are like this. So, the outer covering of this muscle fiber is basically plasma membrane. The structure is very much similar to like a plasma membrane. So, these are called sarcolemma. Sarco means anything related to muscle, and lemma is like plasma lemma. So, these are the outer surface membrane, the covering of this muscle fiber is what we call sarcolemma. Now, this sarcolemma is very much similar to the human cell, outer covering of the cell, which we call cell membrane. Now, if you start looking, so these are the individual fibers, and these fibers are basically, so we are taking an example of arm muscle. So, arm is a bone, so can we call it this is a skeleton? So, this is a skeletal muscle. So, this is a skeletal muscle, and definitely these are having some striation in between, which we will discuss in our coming lectures, that what are these typical lining denotes and why these are having this kind of a structure. Now, just going back to these structures, these muscle bundles are basically communicated with each end. So, if this is a muscle bundle, these are communicating with a very small kind of tubules. So, this tubules is basically covering the entire muscle bundle. So, something is coming out, something is coming in from this kind of small tubules is basically communicating to the whole muscle fiber. Now, this small tubule like structure is called T-tubules, or it is also called as T stands for transverse. So, transverse tubule is a kind of a conducting tubule which are located in a muscle bundle in order to sustain the transportation, or in order to move the solute particle or the solute inside the muscle bundle. Now, these T tubules are very important when we will start study discussing about the four property which we discussed in the earlier slides, that excitability. Now, excitability comes from these tubules, that we have lot of other structure here, where you have a typical mitochondrial membrane, mitochondrial structure, and then we have a very unique endoplasmic reticulum. So, those calcium ions, the calcium ions are very important in kind of making the action potential, so that we can start contracting the muscle. So, this start with the excitation potential, which is basically coming after the calcium ion influx. We will not go in detail about how this mechanism evolved in human being, but it is very important that one have to understand that calcium plays a very important role. Calcium ion plays a very important role in contraction of muscle fiber as such, and we need to understand this aspect in slowly in due course of time, when we will go and see that what are the typical features of the muscle fiber in total. So, this is in nutshell about the complete structure of the muscle fiber, muscle bundle, and then we have this sarcolemma, which is the outer covering, and then these are having a striation because we are talking about skeletal muscle. Now, one thing we just I will just highlight here, and then we will discuss it in coming classes. This muscle is mostly made up of two distinct kind of protein. One is called actin and the other is called myosin. So, this actin and myosin are the two protein molecules, two protein entity which are maximum present in this muscle fiber, and we will discuss why this actin and myosins are very much kind of giving a typical structure to this muscle fiber. The only thing which we need to understand here right now, the actin is the thin filament, very thin in nature, while myosin is thick, little bit more in diameter as compared to actin. And we will see that how this actin and myosin is kind of converging this whole phenomena of the muscle fiber.